Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Flaming Lips called Oczy Mlody. So here's a fun question. When did you stop liking the Flaming Lips? Bit of a bizarre thing to start things off, but if you take a look at the output of this band since probably around the 2000s, you'll slowly start coming to the realization that Wayne Coyne seems to be taking steps to alienate pretty much everybody. Was it in the late 90s with Zurika, an album designed to be played on 4 separate sound systems simultaneously? Was it in 2006 with At War with the Mystics, the Grammy Award-winning step that tends to be regarded as a dip in quality coming after their stronger work around the turn of the millennium? Was it the 2009 dive into nightmares of Embryonic, or their full-length cover of Pink Floyd's entire The Dark Side of the Moon the same year? Was it the massive collaboration in 2012 that called up everyone from Nick Cave and Bon Iver to Chris Martin and Kesha? Or was it their 2013 album The Terror, a more subtle brand of nightmare fuel that might be one of the most bleak cuts of nihilistic existential horror ever made? Or was it their full track-for-track cover of Sgt. Pepper's in 2014 that recruited everyone from Foxygen and Dr. Dog to Tegan and Sarah and Miley Cyrus? Or was it all their collaboration work they did on Miley Cyrus and Her Dead Pets, an album for which you can make the argument is one of the worst albums of the decade? Or was it their assortment of public stunts that alternate between incomprehensible or just plain horrifically bad taste? Okay, look. The point is that, intentional or not, the Flaming Lips has spent the past decade in particular burning whatever goodwill they might have left with an audience that seems to be diminishing, especially when it comes at the expense of a lot of the music. Even as somebody who has liked the majority of the albums that I just described, with the exception of the Miley collaborations and the covers albums, obviously, it's been hard to work up a lot of excitement about the Flaming Lips, especially for this upcoming album. I've already said my lengthy piece about their continued work with Miley, but Buzz was suggesting that those pop influences would be drizzling into their upcoming record, Oczy Mlody, which might have been described as a back to basics, but raised every indicator of following in the Miley-influenced sound that did not flatter this group at all. Coupled with the loss of their longtime drummer Cliff Spurlock, I wasn't sure what to expect with this, especially considering despite how alienating it was, I actually found The Terror really damn compelling in its monolithic darkness. It's one hell of a record that I do like. It made my year-end list in 2013 and it deserves it. But hey, I've actually stuck around for the Flaming Lips for this long, so how is Oczy Mlody? Honestly, it's not good. And worse still, it's not good in a way that everyone who's been following the Flaming Lips could have possibly predicted. Not precisely bad, because the textured sound and style that the band has cultivated can still do a lot of heavy lifting, and there are some decent melodies here, but suffering because it almost certainly is a regression in the delivery, the writing, and the thematic ideas. A lot of people have said that this is the project where they started thinking that Wayne Coyne should get off the drugs, but I think the larger truth of it is that they needed a better muse and focus if they want to make music that doesn't have the feel of a rapidly aging and horny hippie trying to relive his childhood with zero self-awareness. And yeah, we might as well start off with the writing. And look, it's psychedelic rock. I don't expect great or even good lyrics, but I think even die-hard fans of the Flaming Lips will acknowledge that Wayne Coyne's writing has started to slip hard into stream of consciousness yammering that lacks the coherence to really grip me, spiraling into fantastical imagery that bears more of a resemblance to fantastic Trapper Keepers than any sort of sane thematic through line. There really is a sense that in the language that is failing Wayne Coyne on this album on songs like How, looking to try and capture an emotion that can't possibly be conveyed through the words. Although, I would argue that the apocalyptic paranoia that he substitutes is such an obvious cop-out that I'm not surprised or gripped by it at all. Hell, it just gets even more obnoxious on the very next track, There Should Be Unicorns, which reads like a My Super Sweet 16 checklist for the perpetually stoned LA princess at the end of the world. Hell, you could argue that the more the record circles around fears of death, with a reinterpretation of Miley Cyrus's The Floyd song on Sunrise Eyes of the Young, to the fantastical dreamscape of one night while hunting for fairies and witches and wizards to kill, or the damp, creeping darkness of listening to the Frogs with Demon Eyes. Hell, the Castle focuses directly on a friend who has committed suicide. But then you read Wayne Coyne's explanations for that song and the rest of the album, and how that song was originally going to have a greater focus on his emotions, but he was so embarrassed to share them, he rewrote the song to focus explicitly on the friend. Except when you read the language, it doesn't. It only references her through fantastical imagery. It doesn't even make a mention of the suicide. And you know, this kind of drove me off the wall. Just like with Miley Cyrus and Her Dead Pets, Wayne Coyne keeps in the little chuckles and the laughs that he includes at the end of the songs, or purposefully engages in lyrical deflection to avoid ever getting too real. And when you place this album in that context, it gets a lot harder to stomach, because not only does it come across as calculated as all hell, it neuters any real pathos that Wayne Coyne's musings on aging and death might have. It doesn't feel personal, it just feels like he's fucking around. But instead, the title of this record gives away the entire game. Oczy Mlody is a Polish phrase that translates to eyes to the young, and it's clear that said gaze is more voyeuristic than insightful, with Wayne Coyne eyeballing Miley's brand of confused LA princess psychedelia to emulate whatever fragments can be gleaned from it. All shallow disaffection and any moments of real poignant emotion or transcendence completely undercut. And as an artistic choice, it's a baffling one, because there's just so little there from Miley that works anymore. And you can't even really make the argument like with Ab-Soul's Do What Thou Wilt, that he was trolling his audience and critics, because that would imply a level of self-aware insight in the writing that Wayne Coyne doesn't utilize. Mostly because if he had some of that insight, he would probably make more effort into making his vocals sound better, because they're terrible here. They aren't nearly as nakedly gross as Miley's were on her last album, although she certainly does not sound good on the album closer We a Family, not how I would have closed that album. But outside of some decently arranged and produced backing vocals, his main vocal line sounds utterly fried, certainly not all that good. When you compare him to Reggie Watts giving a firm baritone soliloquy at the end of one of the songs, Coyne sounds even less of a presence here, because for every backing arrangement, his main vocal line is drowned in reverb, compression, or ugly effects, and that's not counting the places where he just goes flat and it sounds bad. Now granted, that might be more because in terms of melody or groove, this record is more formless and hazy than ever, rarely ever pulling together a single song that I would consider having any sort of potency on its own, certainly nothing close to the cavernous walls of abrasion that made The Terror a force to be reckoned with. A big part of this seems to be the near complete exclusion of any sort of organic drum work on this album, instead relying on sequenced drum machine beats that certainly don't lend the record any sort of momentum, or all that well match the flow, or feel all that well blended with the rest of the mix. Many of these tracks seem more content to just meander across some flattened melodies and bass lines that I really wish kicked the album into gear, but forget never hitting a real climax point of ecstasy or transcendence or even existential terror, with some of the more choppy vocal fragments of vocals and keys on songs like How, or the awkward vibrations of Nigdy Nine Never Know that pick up some blocky layers of guitar for a little propulsion against the stuttered beat, but barely. No, more of these tracks seem more like they're collapsing mid-composition under their own turgid weight, or in cases like Sunrise, Eyes of the Young, or the tinny Almost Home Blisco de Mu, an awkward mishmash of two not particularly compelling sonic pieces, until we get fragments of strings that are flattened out and an actual guitar line to try and drag things back into track, albeit barely. And really, it is a testament that the lingering darker guitar line of Galaxy I Sync opens up to a gorgeously opulent string section, or the awkwardly mic'd deeper beat playing off some alien cascades of synth and swells of arranged instrumentation on One Night While Hunting, etc., etc., or the sharper bass and guitar groove on Watching the Frogs with Demon Eyes, or even the bells on Do Glowy playing off the more jagged synth Wayne Coyne. He can indeed compose some interesting progressions here, but trying to blend these with some of these beats that are either incredibly thin and underweight, or are so clunky and deep that they just dominate the track to the exclusion of everything else, it just sinks back into the reverb. Many of these songs feel either lining up a little overstuffed or otherwise just not all that appealing. And what absolutely blows my mind is how dour and bleak so much of this album feels in the melodies, thanks to all the minor tones. If this is supposed to be a look to the effervescent joys of youth, you might think that Wayne Coyne is making sly commentary at the expense of my generation by playing it as bleak and empty as it is, but again, that would imply a level of insight I don't remotely buy given the actual writing on this album. You don't get that added level of subtext, it just comes across as completely incoherent and not matching any sort of tone. But in short, look, if you completely ignore the vocals and anything Wayne Coyne actually says, the album is passable, albeit barely. The watery cascades of textures, they don't have momentum, but there are some appealing melodic phrases that emerge from the murk. I can kind of get into it. It doesn't really go anywhere, but it's a testament to how far the Flaming Lips have fallen that merely passable will be enough for some people. But you know what? On enough drugs, I can see this grabbing some interest. But on the other hand, great psychedelic music should inspire the feel of drugs without needing them to make the music remotely tolerable. And for the most part, a lot of this album album feels like a slog with only a very few number of bright moments, and lyrics and singing that are not much better. For me, this is a very, very, very light 5 out of 10, only saved from a failing grade by a few good moments and a couple good guitar tones more than actual good songs, and only a recommendation for Flaming Lips completionists. Otherwise, they've got more than their fair share of great records over the course of their career, and this is definitely not one of them. The majority of the days, I would skip this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine any Flaming Lips fans liking this album, but hey, the poll's up here so you guys can comment on it and vote on it so you can tell me how wrong I am. But if you guys want to even prove that I'm even more wrong, the link to buy the album is in the description. I'm going to try to do that a little bit more often. Otherwise, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my schedule, my link to my Patreon is right here. 3 times a week, you guys get to vote on what albums are coming up on my schedule, and once a week, the higher Patreon contributors get to vote and add albums as well, and possibly even movies. So, take a look right there if you want more information. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.